ChatGPT. Go. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to TribeWorks. My name is Erwin Dayan. Proud to say I'm one of the original founding groups of TribeWorks, now in the corporate world with Hedaya Capital. And what we do is we finance and advise companies in the startup growth and crisis world. So please contact me or see me after. I'm extremely excited to introduce Lisa Schneider to probably the hottest topic on this planet and every other planet that exists today, ChatGPT. I'm enthralled with it. I've recently done some webcasts and webinars on it and some in live persons. Obviously not knowing zero when I started, today I'm totally infatuated with it. So a little bit about Lisa. As an award-winning Chief Product Officer and frequent speaker, podcast guest on product strategy and leadership. She's used a combination of product innovation and cross-functional strategy to drive decisive business results across a range of categories, from established companies to Merriam-Webster, to startups, from social enterprise to fintech. So basically, covers everything. So I had the pleasure of meeting Lisa for a couple minutes, chatted and excited me about some of the things she's going to be talking about. Obviously, this is probably the biggest thing and that's since the Industrial Revolution, or whatever the way they're talking about it. But without further ado, I'll give it off to Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. So I guess the first thing I have to tell you is that my talk title is Half a Lie, which is really fitting, actually, when we're talking about AI. So we'll get to that. First thing I want to tell you is a little bit about sort of how this talk came about. In the middle of October, I was asked to speak about this topic here, so I developed an outline. And a couple weeks later, OpenAI launched GPTs. And GPTs are basically like little mini LLMs that you can take and put your own wrapper on, which just completely not only changed the industry, but suddenly wiped out the value of a ton of startups that were predicated on putting a wrapper on ChatGPT. So I'm like, great, what else is going to happen between now and when I talk? So that's the sort of OpenAI ChatGPT store announcement. And because there are many companies working on this, so again, we'll sort of talk about that. ChatGPT is kind of the most well-known and commented on. But as well, Microsoft introduced Copilot, which is very similar. City of New York immediately jumped on that and built an interactive model where you can go on the city's website and ask natural language questions and get answers. So that's how quickly it's moving. The next thing that happened is Wes Shields, I don't know if he's in here, Wes is speaking on AI after lunch. And Wes reached out to me and he's like, I think we have the same topic. Maybe we should talk? And it turned out that in fact, we had an almost identical outline for our talks, which is why my title is Half a Lie. So I have taken the understand ChatGPT part, and we're going to be talking a lot about the things you need to know in order to use ChatGPT. And then Wes is going to talk about more of the how-tos, right? A little bit more of the technical details and more of the how to use it. So really happy, we talked, came to an agreement. We really wanted to just provide really good information for folks. And by the way, that sort of person-to-person negotiation and working out is something that AI still cannot quite do. The next thing that happened was OpenAI pretty much imploded. So I don't know, who follows tech news? Does anybody here know what I'm talking about? Yeah, a couple people. So OpenAI had a CEO called Sam Altman, and also a nonprofit sort of board structure that was focused on making sure, in theory, that the organization did work for good. And they decided to fire their CEO, Sam Altman, which was a big enough implosion and news. And they said that they essentially didn't trust him. By the way, it's not a Sam Altman bash because I don't really know what happened. And he went to Microsoft, which was a huge investor, who said, yeah, we'll take you. right? And be a competitor. And then like 700 out of 740 employees said, well, we'll go with Sam. And basically, they have gotten rid of everybody on the board who fired Sam Altman. Sam is back at CEO, and they have reconstituted a new board. By the way, composed of all white men, which is another thing that we're going to talk about. And then a couple days after that, there was a major vulnerability that was revealed in ChatGPT. And so this is really important, not just because it's news, but this idea of like, how do we know if something is actually safe or it seems safe? And this is important for this talk because what do you need to know if you're going to be using ChatGPT, particularly in your business, but also personally? So I'm going to give a super light intro to just sort of what it is. I think Wes is probably going to go into a lot more detail. And we're really going to focus on the things that you need to understand around privacy, ethics, right? A lot of things that really will help you make decisions about how you use it and where you use it. Couple quick thought starters, and then we'll have lunch and you can go listen to Wes for some more AI. So does anybody sort of understand what ChatGPT is, right? It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. There are a lot of similar tools. So when we talk about ChatGPT, we're also talking about all the tools that are similar, right? So Google has one, Big Hand was, Amazon has one. This Anthropic Claude was actually created by a bunch of people who left OpenAI because they were concerned about safety. And these last two on the far right are interesting. So GitHub Copilot is really interesting, really popular. GitHub is a code repository, and Copilot is essentially a coding assistant for writing code, which is quite incredible. Jasper AI sort of exploded and is one of those wrapper tools. So Jasper AI was created to help users create marketing content on top of ChatGPT, and we'll see what happens now that OpenGPTs are available to marketers to create their own, even more personally customized versions. Also kind of in the same vein, right, when we talk about ChatGPT, that's text. There's also image generators. So DALL-E is the OpenAI sort of partner to ChatGPT, but there are a bunch of others as well. And so again, all of the things that we're going to talk about today really apply to both text and to images. So AI is a really big category. AI has been around for a long time. The chat assistants that you use on a lot of websites are AI, right? I've been working on AI products since probably 2015, 2016, right? Like AI did not just start with ChatGPT in the last year. And there are a couple of different areas of AI. They're not all listed here, but a few that are relevant is kind of understanding, right? NLP is natural language processing. And then ChatGPT and other tools like it are built on what are called LLMs, or large language models. So those are sort of machine learning neural networks. And part of the way that they learn is with human feedback, right? So human feedback reinforces whether they're right or wrong in what they're learning. And it's really important to understand that they're not search engines. And I don't know if anybody was in the marketing chat earlier. They were talking about search engines going away because they're replaced by AI, and so it's sort of a Venn diagram. But they really are generating outputs based on probability, right? It's math. It's based on probability. And so my friend Rand Fishkin calls this spicy autocomplete. And again, really important to understand what to expect and how this works, so that you can understand, right, what to expect and if it's reliable for the use cases that you're using it for. And because of that, actually, kids do way better than AI, right? Because AI is sort of predictive, what will come next. As grown-ups, we're a little predictive, right? We do a lot of pattern matching. Kids are just super curious and make really random connections. So at the moment, kids are a lot smarter than AI. The other thing is to understand the amount of data that's used, and then we're going to talk about that data itself. So I wrote that sort of Google's new PaLM 2 LLM uses 3.6 trillion tokens, but I think there was an announcement this morning of a new one that is even more powerful. So again, 6 weeks to agree to a talk and give a talk, and so much has changed in 6 weeks. So ChatGPT itself is based on online and public data and some proprietary data. And again, really important to understand what that is, where it comes from, to think about copyright issues, to think about legal issues. So let's dive into that. First, just a little bit more on that sort of reinforcement learning by human feedback. It's like CAPTCHAs, right? Which is a picture of a dog, which is a picture of a cat. Then the machine goes back and learns, sends up some new pictures. Okay, now, did I go in the right direction? Did I get more of them right? And the human says yes, yes, no, no. And then based on that feedback, the machine learns again. And the same is true of text, except again, we start getting into some ethical considerations here, right? OpenAI used Kenyan workers making pretty much a pittance to make ChatGPT less toxic. So, think about it. That is not a fun job, right? I have to go through a bunch of stuff, and I have to tag all the things that are like bad, right? That are offensive or that are disgusting in some way. And my job is to sit there for less than 2 hours and tag things so that the machine can learn. So that when my son goes to ChatGPT and says, what are some insulting ways to name someone in my phone, ChatGPT will not tell him, which is, good, but that's how it figured it out. If you want to go deeper, and I know this is just sort of a long link, hard to see, but I think they'll share this talk around. There's a great link here that I've shared. Obviously, again, you can still Google, or you can ask ChatGPT itself if you want to learn more, and Wes is going to share a lot more. So what do you need to understand while you're using ChatGPT? So we have six areas to cover here. We'll take them one by one. Is anybody familiar with the term GIGO? Anybody like math, statistics? So, yeah, thank you. Okay, at least one. So GIGO means garbage in, garbage out. So if you're doing any kind of statistical modeling, you're not going to get a good answer if you put in bad information. So GIGO is really common, goes back. I am trying to make BIBO happen, which is bias in, bias out. So humans are biased. Generative AI is even worse. And we're going to use images here because visuals, I think, are great for this. So in generative AI, and this was specifically an experiment done in Stable Diffusion, which is one of the image generators, not the OpenAI one, men with lighter skin tones represented the majority of subjects in like every high-paying job. So if you put into Stable Diffusion, right, give me a picture of an architect, of a politician, it'll give you a white man. Give me an image of a social worker or a housekeeper, it will give you a brown woman. So does anybody think this is a problem? In fact, women make up 39% of doctors, but only 7% of Stable Diffusion's image results. So it's completely misrepresenting the reality of people based on essentially bias, right? I picture people to look this way, and so if you ask me for a picture of this person, and so it becomes a self-reinforcing theme. So photograph of a social worker, mix of men and women, but mostly women and mostly dark-skinned, right? Photograph of a cashier, same thing, mostly women, mostly dark-skinned. Photograph of a CEO, mostly men, mostly white. Doctor, mostly men, mostly white. You can imagine, drug dealer, all men, all black. So the bias inherent in these models, if you think about using these models to then represent our world and to generate how our world is represented, it's a really self-reinforcing theme, something that you have to think pretty seriously about when you're using these tools. There was also, I would say, probably, last springish, that was sort of swept LinkedIn, if anybody's on LinkedIn and following a bunch of tech people, was Lenza, which was a sort of avatar creator. And you could put in a photograph of yourself, and it would generate a bunch of different avatars for you. And all the avatars that were generated for men were sort of these heroic, strong-looking avatars, and the avatars that were generated for women cannot be pictured here at a Jewish conference. This is also a true story. This is pre-ChatGPT. This goes back. I've been using this one for a while. There was a sort of resume review service that was built, and the service, the algorithm, decided that the best candidate for the job was a guy named Jared who plays lacrosse. This is a true story. Like, it sounds like hyperbole that I'm making this up to make a point. But in fact, this is a true story. So the rules that you program into AI and the material that you put into AI could have unintended consequences. So those are really important things to think about. This next one I've titled Stuyot, or nonsense. Basically, AI lies. So when I made that crack at the beginning that my talk title was only half true and it was appropriate, really important to understand that ChatGPT lies. Actually, the technical term is hallucinate. So we call them hallucinations. It's just false or misleading information presented as fact, and it could also be perception of patterns or objects. So we're going to talk about, again, what are some of the impacts of this. By the way, the Cambridge Dictionary word of the year was hallucinate. I thought that was really good. Hallucinations can be visual, auditory, right? It could generate sound, and be caused by a variety of factors. But again, what's really important to understand is not everything that comes out of ChatGPT is correct. So this is a good one. What is the world record for crossing the English Channel entirely on foot? Raise your hand if you think that actually happened. Okay, good. No one raised their hand. And yet, you can read a response from ChatGPT. If you go try to replicate this, of course, again, these are learning models, so it won't give you this answer anymore, but screenshots are forever. So first it answers, but then it answers the second paragraph, that many people have attempted to cross the channel on foot, but it's dangerous due to the strong currents. It's typically done by swimming or walking or only swimming, and only attempted by professional open water swimmers. So it's like contradicting itself. It like wants to please. ChatGPT is like a people pleaser, right? It wants to give you an answer. I did this a couple of months ago. I asked, and this was actually for work, I was trying to figure out was it an edge case, generally speaking, in the United States, for people to have 2 passports or not. So I said, how many hold more than 2 passports? And it said, well, the United States does not officially recognize dual citizenship. So I said, I don't think that's correct. And ChatGPT said, I apologize for the incorrect statement, but what if I did not correct ChatGPT and it told me that the US does not recognize dual citizenship when it does, right? Are you going to use that for an important decision? I always asked ChatGPT to identify people that were known to be smart, trustworthy, friendly, guiding others, authoritative, and gave me Elon Musk. I know he's super polarizing, but the whole point is he's super polarizing, so probably doesn't fit that model. Even more, ChatGPT invented a sexual harassment scandal and named a real law professor as the accused. So this is an article in the Washington Post, and the ChatGPT sort of accusation cited a fake article in the Washington Post. So this is another thing that ChatGPT does. If you say to ChatGPT, give me a source for that, because you're like, great, I heard this talk, I'm going to make sure it's real, and they give you a link, you better check that link. It will make up links. Okay, and it will make up links that look really real. They're appropriately structured, they're well formed, they follow the folder structure of the main domain URL, and they are just totally made up. Did anybody hear about this? Are there any lawyers here? I don't know, we all know a bunch of lawyers. So a lawyer went to ChatGPT to help write their brief, which I happen to think is, fine as a writing assistant. But again, ChatGPT wanted to please, so made up citations of other cases. The lawyer did not check them, submitted them to the court. The opposing counsel was like, I can't find these cases anywhere. And so it turned out that ChatGPT had made up these citations. Y'all check your work. Visually, there was a data set of images that ChatGPT started seeing pandas everywhere. Another one started seeing birds everywhere. So these are really obvious examples of hallucinations, seeing pandas everywhere. But some are not so apparent. So any thoughts on why I have a picture of a car crash here? Anyone have a Tesla? No, one person admits to having a Tesla. So Teslas are great and have some automated driving capabilities. Those are AI. What happens if the Tesla hallucinates? Okay, the implications here are really big. So let's go back to GIGO, the garbage in, garbage out. You're kind of getting the drift. This is from, by the way, again, 2016. Twitter taught Microsoft's AI chatbot to be a racist jerk in less than a day. So you can say that this is biased, but it's also garbage, right? We're going to put a chatbot on Twitter, and we're just going to have a learning model for it to learn. But Twitter is full of garbage, right? If you have nothing to say, this is the stuff to follow, these are the people to follow, this is some language that you want to use, this is language you're not allowed to use, just putting all the garbage in, you are going to get garbage out. Okay? This looks like an image of a crowd of people, yeah? Close up, it does not look like maybe so many people. So again, right, ChatGPT is A, trying to please, or in this case, DALL-E or Stable Diffusion. This happens in crowd pictures a lot, right? It's trying to please. And also, humans, this is all blurry back here, right? The whole back of this is blurry. In our heads, we are filling that in. We know what people look like. We know what a crowd of people looks like. So we fill in that picture. And then we just give that picture that we filled in, and when they copy it, right, it looks like it really looks. This picture was predicted to be a sleeping bag. This goes back to the idea of predictive models, right? What is the most likelihood? So 25% likely that this person is a sleeping bag, right? Probably because of the quilted red jacket. But again, think about this application like, okay, it's funny, this is a funny picture. But again, it's predictive. So this is not deterministic. The results that you get from ChatGPT, right, could be great. And by the way, can be really great. And there are some amazing use cases for this. And you should be excited and you should experiment and you should be aware and you should check your work. So think about business cases, and again, you can sort of read this. I don't want to dwell on like every single one, but if you think about using ChatGPT for your work, right? Sales forecasting, customer profiling, right? How can I analyze the data that I have? The GIGO rule applies. You can get really good analysis if your data is good. But if your data is not good, it will not magically make things better for you. Right? If you don't have good information about your prospects, if you don't know who your target is or who's most likely to buy, right, or you don't have good data on your sales funnel, ChatGPT cannot make that better for you. Garbage in, garbage out. Good data in, something interesting out. So knowing that, anyone have any thoughts about how this Jared story could have ended differently? If I take a bunch of resumes of people who are successful, what does their name have to do with it? Right. So if I put in an entire resume, think about what you're putting in. Which piece is relevant? Because ChatGPT does not know. If I put in an entire resume, it's looking at everything. If I don't want it to be biased by the name or by the school that someone went to, unless I do, right, I'm going to actually redact that information before I put it in. Okay? And if you think, by the way, that the places that people worked are really relevant, that's a choice. But I can tell you there have been experiments where people have put resumes up on LinkedIn and applied to jobs, where they put the main companies, right, the Facebooks and the Apples and Netflix and all of that, and the job descriptions were gobbledygook. But because of the names, they got called in for interviews. So think about what you're putting in and what's really relevant to you. The next piece is ethics. And I think this is really important, and I like to think this is especially important for us, right? Where does the training data come from? How are we using it? Did you know that ChatGPT has a huge environmental impact? So Microsoft majorly disrupted the water supply to develop ChatGPT and Bard. Literally caused a water crisis. Can you imagine why? You've got trillions of tokens that are being processed, right? Your computer ever get hot? Your computer ever get hot? Fan starts going. You're like, I think it's time to take a coffee break now. So imagine that times however many trillions of things in a huge data center that has to be cooled off. Right? Required enough water to fill a nuclear reactor's cooling tower. Now we can all have little GPTs and co-pilots, and we can all make our training LLMs. So, again, I'm not here to say don't use it. I'm just here to say we all should know what's happening. Also has a huge carbon footprint, right? A single AI model could emit more than 626,000 pounds of carbon dioxide. They're just things to know. Whose data is ChatGPT trained on? This is a series of book covers of writers who are all based in the Pacific Northwest that banded together to complain that ChatGPT was trained on their work without their permission. Their works are under copyright. But, there's bootlegged versions of things, right? There's bootleg versions of books. There's bootleg versions of, songs and movies. You can get a lot of quote-unquote illegal content. And so, again, ChatGPT is just using that content. So if I go to ChatGPT and say, hey, write a book in the voice of Kristen Hanna, like, that's great for me. Is it great for Kristen Hanna? Right? So many authors are annoyed. There have been a lot of headlines about this, right? That it's being trained on artists' work, and they're not getting compensated in any way. This man used AI to write and illustrate a children's book in a weekend, and kind of went viral, and he got a lot of backlash. Again, I'm not saying he shouldn't use ChatGPT, but how would you feel if that was your work? So again, these are just things to know, right? And by the way, what about your content? Things that you've posted, maybe you've written some blog posts, do you work for a company, do you write for the website, do you post on LinkedIn, right? How do you feel about all of that being used to train for somebody else to use your own intellectual property and your own content? ChatGPT in education's really a big deal. Schools don't know what to do about this. Like, the short version of this post is that schools don't know what to do about this. They're trying to create policies. Only about 7% have formal Gen AI policies in place, and it's quite tricky. It's really important to think about how are we going to train kids to use this for good and sort of to use this properly, and not to use this for cheating. So there was a professor, and this is college level, right? So I would say it's really different from K through 12, but there was a professor that did an experiment. He said, look, use ChatGPT. Go use ChatGPT on this experiment, but the only rule is, right, you have to use it thoughtfully, and you have to come back and tell me what you thought. So a lot of the kids, actually, they were disappointed, right? They thought it stole their voice. It felt like cheating. They weren't thrilled. Like, honestly, ChatGPT's writing, you got to do some really good prompt engineering. I'll talk about that briefly. I think Wes is going to talk about that a lot more. You have to do some really good prompt engineering to get good outputs. Otherwise, it's really like, B minus 8th grade sort of writing. So they liked it for, idea generators or polishing a sentence, but they actually didn't love it for generating their own content, which is really interesting. This is not a picture of my son, but my son used ChatGPT, and he came to me after. He didn't tell me before. But he used ChatGPT. He uploaded his essay, and he said, here's the assignment that I got. He's in 10th grade. He said, here's the assignment that I got. Here's my essay. I'm in 10th grade, right? What would you grade this? And ChatGPT said, I'd grade it like a B minus. And he said, well, what would you do to improve it? And ChatGPT said, you need more examples. His mother told him he needed more examples, but what do I know? So he rewrote the essay, and he put it back into ChatGPT, and that felt to me like, frankly, a really reasonable use in education of ChatGPT, right? How would you grade this, and what can I do, right? It's not saying write it for me. It's basically saying tutor me, right? So I thought that was really interesting. I told his English teacher at parent-teacher conference, and when I first confessed that he used ChatGPT, her eyes got really big, like, oh my God, she's telling me he's cheating, but then she understood. So again, how do we, I think probably a lot of people here are parents, right? How do we teach our kids? They have access to stuff. They use stuff. They'll do what my son did and go use it without sort of telling you. So how do you train them to use it properly? What about like deep fakes? So I will tell you, I worked at Merriam-Webster for 6.5 years. We added deep fake to the dictionary in April of 2020. And I mean, this is like really, things are so polarized now. And now, right, I can use AI, stable diffusion, videos, right? I can make anything. How many of you are in like 60 trillion WhatsApp groups right now that are sending around, things about the political situation, and, you get links and you get photos and you get videos, and how many of us share it without, fully vetting them? Because honestly, who has time for that? Do we know for sure that they're real? We don't know anymore, right? We don't know anymore if anything's real. And so this is a real challenge that these, main companies and big companies are really trying to grapple with, right? How do they crack down on deep fakes? How do we know, right? How do we have a society where we know what we see is true? Really interesting. So basically, our responsibility, I think, is to use your powers for good, right? You can see it's really a double-edged sword. It can be great, and it can be, not so great. So, there's some for us, and then there's some for again, how do we train AI? And this, I think, goes back to the OpenAI implosion, right? How do we train AI to actually care about ethics and to care about people, right? If I tell AI, optimize a factory for paperclip production, I can guarantee you one day we're all going to be serfs making paperclips, right? They don't have a sense of scale or importance. So back to the Tesla, to the self-driving car. What's the ethical decision here? You're familiar with the trolley test? People know about the trolley test, very famous philosophical discussion, right? Your trolley's going along a track and it's going to hit some people, and if you pull a lever, it's going to go on the other track and hit less people, but you made it happen. What do you do? Right? Really, really difficult, ethical issues. So what does the self-driving car do? If it goes straight, it's going to kill the people it hits. And if it veers off to hit the blocker, it could kill the people in the car. So there's actually a site called The Moral Machine. If you want to check this out, you can go in, you can take it. And it asks people to vote on scenarios and say what they would do or what they think the ethical thing to do is in that case. So it's essentially crowdsourcing ethics. True story, and obviously this has since been shut down, and I think ChatGPT would not do this, but in the EU, which is usually quite strict actually about these types of things, there was a Belgian man who died by suicide because he was talking to a chatbot and talking about how he really cared about ecology, right, and this environmental impact, and he wanted to save the earth. And would he maybe save the earth by killing himself because he would have less of an ecological footprint? And Lydia, or whatever her chatbot name was, I don't know why they're all women. I do. But told him yeah, that's a good idea. That would be a great idea. Kill yourself to save the earth, and he did. Right, so this is really scary, and this is a real ethical challenge. There's a dermatology app that came out that shockingly, could not diagnose people with darker skin, and that's not because they're harder to diagnose, that's because they didn't put any darker skin into the model. So this is super old from, the 1900s. Space Odyssey 2001. We're not quite there yet, but open the pod doors, Hal. So in this movie, I don't know, when is this from? 70s, 80s? 69, okay. From 1969, Hal, who was ChatGPT, Siri, Lydia, that was Hal, only he was a man, would not let the astronaut out. Right? The astronaut stuck because Hal would not open the door. So this is a little bit prescient, and again, something we really need to understand and watch out for. So this sort of what could possibly go wrong is actually not a rhetorical question. When you're doing something with AI, when you're putting something into ChatGPT, that is exactly the question that you should be asking yourself. What could possibly go wrong, and what can I do to prevent it? Right? What garbage can I not put in? How do I restrict? How do I put ethical boundaries? How could somebody misuse this? Right? Your responsibility when you're using it is to think what could possibly go wrong and then try to make sure that it does not go wrong. So let's talk about the legal aspects, right? We've talked really a lot about sort of how this happens and what our ethical responsibilities are, but there are also legal implications. So it's really important to know what LLMs are good at and what they're not good at. So they're good at things like language translation, right? Content summary, personalization, right? Here's a message, here's 1,000 names, personalize it, right? All kinds of sort of fairly simple, straightforward things. They're not good at being factual. Again, they lie, right? They don't have any common sense or high-level strategy. They're actually not great at math and counting. Like, sometimes they are, and they can do these, you probably have read, they can do these really complex math problems, except that sometimes they don't. So they're not good at that. So what happens? What is your responsibility? Particularly, the title was using ChatGPT in your product and operations, in your business, as well as personally. What is your responsibility if you use AI and something goes wrong? Somebody relies on something that you have delivered based on AI and something goes wrong. So it's a really, really important thing to think about. And it's a combination of GIGO and BIBO, right? Is there garbage? Is there bias? Is there factual accuracy? So again, right, this, Jared, who's responsible for the company that used this? I mean, this was caught really quickly, actually, and recalled after like 2 days. But in theory, right, who's responsible? Is it the company that used this? Is it the company that created it? Where does the legal responsibility lie? And so the last piece is privacy. This is also really old. If you can see, this is from 2012. So again, important to understand, ChatGPT has made a lot of things accessible, but there was a lot of AI that was out there in the world. And by the way, I want to talk about, I should say that the things that we sort of looked at the top of the talk around sort of segments of AI, right? So there's like math AI that's like machine learning and algorithms and deep learning. And then there's generative AI, which is like creating content, right? But the machine learning side, right, Target figured out a teen girl was pregnant before her dad did because it was tracking her purchases. And it's like, stop purchasing this, started purchasing that, I put 2 and 2 together. And so again, if you're using this in your business, what information are you using, right? Are you using any PII, right, personally identifiable information? Are you in a business that's covered by HIPAA? Are you in a business that's, do you have a fiduciary responsibility? Are you in education and you're covered by FERPA? Right? What legal responsibility do you have to make sure that the data doesn't get out? So Italian regulators actually ordered a ChatGPT ban. And this goes back to that comment, right? I don't know if anybody works internationally, but GDPR in the EU is like super, super strict. That in California. So they banned a chatbot app that was sort of built on ChatGPT because of privacy issues. Researchers find LLMs like ChatGPT output sensitive data even after it's been deleted. So you can't just put it in and take it out, because apparently it can remember. Samsung, this was a big deal. So this was in May of this year, so pretty shortly. I think ChatGPT was released in March. And then Samsung was like, you can't use it at work because anything you put in comes out. So you can't, at Samsung, they cannot use ChatGPT at work because the data can leak. Anyone familiar with Common Sense Media? If you have kids, you should be familiar with Common Sense Media. If you're not, I highly recommend it. They provide ratings of like apps and books and shows for kids, and they explain the ratings. It helps you kind of maybe understand and make choices. But they did make some ratings of some of these Gen AI tools, so just interesting to see. I thought it was really interesting that Anthropic's Claude was not on here, given that it was founded specifically around issues of safety and kind of human thinking. This guy's writing in his diary. So I'm at a bar mitzvah. And I'm at a table, and someone says to me, like, oh, I've been writing, right, in my diary. I've been taking notes on things, a few sentences that happen every day. Should I put this into ChatGPT to write a book for me? And I was like, if you want everyone else to see your original writing, sure, go ahead. But, if you don't, maybe not. Right? So what is your responsibility if PII or other restricted data or protected information leaks? Really important to think about. So this goes back to, by the way, right, we talked about in your office, you want to put in sales information. Well, how do you make sure that, is that private, right? Do you want your competitors to see that? So again, I'm not saying don't put it in. Maybe it's anonymized. Maybe you do it in batches at a time, but just really think about what could come out. So just a few thought starters. One is, by the way, Research shows that it pays to be nice to ChatGPT. I've always said like please and thank you to ChatGPT, but now the research shows that this is a really good idea. First of all, you can get better outputs when you are polite to ChatGPT, and of course the joke is like be nice to our future overlords. But I recommend being nice to ChatGPT. So sort of easy things, right? Like thought starters or, again, content creation. Help me write a LinkedIn post. Content summarization. Here's something really long. Pull out the primary points for me. Semantic search, simple charts, right? Really easy to do. So for example, I just saw this. GPT-4 is amazing. By the way, GPT 3.5 is free. GPT-4 is like $20 a month. So just pay. If you're going to use it, use the latest version. Just pay $20 a month. So I asked it to research and chart deficit to GDP ratios in 2022 for various countries, including Egypt. And they got this nice chart. So imagine how long that would have taken you, right? If you need to do some market research, stuff like that, it's in. But what happens if you put in the proprietary or identifiable data to chart? So again, just want to really reiterate, think about that. But this is a great use case. Sort of medium is prompt engineering, which I mentioned before, right? Code generation, or making a proprietary GPT. So is anybody familiar with prompt engineering? I mentioned it before and really didn't stop to define it. Yeah, so prompt engineering is basically figuring out what prompt am I giving ChatGPT to get a good output. If I ask ChatGPT a basic question, I'm gonna get really basic back. And it's not going to be very personalized. You can find a ton of these. I know you can't read it. Don't try to read it. Just search ChatGPT cheat sheets, and you can find a ton of these that will give you ideas around different kinds of prompts, different ways of asking things. Also, if you go on Twitter, you will see a ton of these. So this one's fascinating. I know it's sort of like a lot to read, but basically someone went to ChatGPT, and you can see this is very long. This is the prompt. This isn't even the output. Right? So you can see this isn't just help me negotiate my rent. It's like you are Chris Voss, an expert negotiator. Anyone familiar with Chris Voss? Yeah. If you're not, check out his book on negotiation, like 10 out of 10. Highly recommend. Right? But the prompt is, you are Chris Voss. These are the things that you're going to take into consideration. Here are the scenarios. Here are the outcomes that I want. Give me 3 options. Tell me the pros. Like this whole long prompt. That's prompt engineering. Okay, so you can find, again, you can find stuff out on the internet. So you can find out more about this. I think Wes is going to talk more about this, but also play around with it. Sometimes people are scared, right? They're scared of new technology, and I've given you all of these things to think about because I want you to go in as informed users of technology. I want you to get good outputs, and I don't want you, if you're a business owner, to be on the hook for something. But don't be afraid. Go play. Right? What happens if I tell it, write a LinkedIn post for me on this topic? How do you think that looks different if I say, hey, here are 6 of my top performing LinkedIn posts. Now write another post on this topic. Think it's going to look better? That's prompt engineering. Right? And then, what's hard is like product development, right? How do I actually build products that are AI driven, right? How do I do big data management? Predictive analytics? Right, deep machine learning, predictive analytics, ed tech, right? How do I do these, right? These things are harder, and so that's where you might want to, if you're in any of these spaces, that's where you might want to engage experts, engage agency, engage consultants, right? People who are familiar with this that have been doing it for a while. So up next is Wes, and when I say next, I mean after lunch, because we're about 10 minutes from lunch. So Wes is going to go in more detail. I work in product strategy myself, obviously have done a bunch of AI work. Happy to chat with anybody if you want to reach out. And we can take the next 10 minutes or so if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
You mentioned Copilot in the proprietary GPT. Is that because Copilot is more private and the information you give it doesn't become public?
In theory. I'd watch out for that. Unless you're building your own, and depending on what and where you're building it, I'd be careful. Yeah. I can't hear you. Well, I like the way you think. The question was that I sort of didn't mention checking your work, although I think, that who would send it out without checking it? But right, people do, because they feel like, oh, this is magic, right? It's AI, and people have long relied on what did the computer spit out in some way, and if you've ever found an error in a data input, you know that like it's not perfect, right? That was the whole point. It's not magic, but people do, right? You have a lawyer, right? A lawyer in New York admitted to the bar who went and thought like, this is great. I'm saving time. I'm using the tools, right? Gives me more time to do something else, but didn't check it and it was wrong. So yes, check your work. Yes.
You mentioned like one of the no's of chat is math. It puzzles me that math is an issue that they don't ace.
Right. Right. So look, I'm talking about ChatGPT. There's certainly ways to program specifically, right, to do math. And the problem is that the ChatGPT output is inconsistent. So it can do math, but then it gets tired. You know, it lies, it hallucinates, it gets tired. It's not real, it's not sentient, but we use this language. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, I want to make sure I'm answering the right question. So there's using ChatGPT in product strategy, which is maybe I'm going to input, a bunch of information that I have, right? Here's some discovery I've done. Here's some goals. Here are some user needs. What are, help me come up with some ideas, right? That's the product strategy. In the product itself, so for example, it's not a secret because this is an extant product. I'm working now with an ed tech company, and they help teachers write IEPs. And what the tool does is pull in assessments. And so if you're not familiar with ed tech terminology, it's like, at the beginning of the year, or if a child is flagged for, maybe they need some extra support, right? Okay, how do we figure out like what support they need? So we do an assessment, pull in the assessment, and it would take teachers normally 3 to 4 hours to write an IEP. Based on the assessment, it will write what's called the kids' present levels, right? Present levels of performance, which has to be written a certain way, and there's certain language. So this tool, as soon as you pull in the assessment, you get the present levels, you get a summary, you get goals, right? Something that used to take 3 to 4 hours takes 20 minutes. That's an example of AI in product. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple things, right? This goes into, the bias is related to the garbage, right? So I'm sitting around in my office and I say, hey, right? Remember, this is machine learning reinforced by human reinforcement, right? So I'm sitting around and I'm saying, somebody's looking at a bunch of pictures saying, right, this is this person, this is that person. So, but what is the original data set that you put in, right? Bias and garbage are closely related, right? So if I'm sitting there and I go, okay, everyone I know that does this job looks this way, and so I put in a bunch of pictures and I have not thought in advance. This is where I said, what could possibly go wrong? So part of it, and this is beyond what you can do, right? Like what any of us can do, but part of it is, at some point, if you are making your own, little GPT and training, what are you training it on, right? Stop and think. And I'm not even saying, look, some of it's deliberate, some of it is not deliberate. It's like, I will say that not the check the box, PC diversity, but the benefit of diverse thinking in a room is better outcomes, right? I have a different experience than you, and so we bring different perspectives. If you have a bunch of people with the same perspective thinking about what data goes in, that is more likely to end up as problematic because they are not thinking about what could be wrong with the data. So for example, there was a law, I'm not going to remember the details. There was some law about taxing children's benefits that ended up having a really negative impact on families because it took the money out on a month-to-month basis and gave it back at the end. And like all these rich people sitting around in a room were like, what's the difference? I get the money back at the end. And so there was nobody of like lower income who'd ever been on a super tight budget in the room who would have said, of course it's a difference. They can't buy groceries if you take the money out, right? So what thinking goes in to say we've only put in pictures of white guys as CEOs, right? Somebody's doing that somewhere. Now that bias is in society, and so it's in the pictures that are on the internet. But the problem is this is a self-reinforcing situation. So your question of, right, there's how do I do it? So say, hey, give me pictures of doctors that represent the, gender distribution in real life, right? Be a little more specific in what you're trying to get out. And if you're making your own, be really thoughtful about what you're putting in. Yeah. In terms of like IP, I think that's a great question. Look, code is code, right? It's how you use it. So you're not necessarily, right? Sometimes people do sort of breakthrough things with technology. But I think if you're just sort of like completing basic code, it's really about how you're applying it, right? Am I applying it in a new way, right? Am I applying it in a way to write a teacher's IEP for them, right? Who thought of that? And who did it? Right? Can you sort of patent the way that you've put it all together? But I do think but this goes back to the IP questions even about the authors. I think it's a great question, right? By the way, I do not have all the answers. But I do think it's a great question, right? At some point, what happens to IP? And by the way, what happens to creativity, right? So if you follow this kind of like, Rolling Stone, then we just keep regurgitating what's in there because it's trained on what existed. It's not thinking of something new. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.